Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. Lighter turnout than usual, where you have to come in early if you want to get seats. But we're delighted that Chad was able to cross the barrier of I-10 and make it here. Chad Briggs is, if I get this wrong, we'll problem.
Yes.
Is Global Vice President for Sales and Technology. Very good. Right. For Air Liquide. He joined Air Liquide in 1997 in the United States Corporate Health, Safety, and Environmental Department. Chad has worked in a variety of management positions as Project Director for Change Management projects in Paris, Houston, and Frankfurt, Commercial Manager, Singa's Business Unit, Reliability Center Manager, Singa's Operations, Texas, and leading Mechanical Integrity Project in North America. In this new position, right, that title is very new, and he will be relocated. He'll be relocating to Frankfurt in 2017, which is why we added him, right, and fit him into our scheme, which might explain why there's not as many people. But we still wanted to get him because it's a lot easier to get him in here from Houston than from Frankfurt. So, Chad received his Bachelor of Science in Environmental Science in 1997. So I guess he's from biology. I guess that's where that resides. And later got an MBA from Tulane in 2006. And we are delighted that he is here to share some of his experiences with us. Thank you, Chad. Thank you.
So I prepared a bit of a speech, but now seeing the crowd, I'd actually like permission to swap that and engage maybe a little bit more kind of town hall-ish. So I'll give you a bit of a brief introduction, but then I'd like to talk about what you would like to talk about. I can drone on for half an hour, and maybe I won't cover the things that you would like for me to talk about. Some of them I might not have answers to, so I will get to see whether you test me and I fail. But a bit of a background and maybe a bit of a catch-up. I am from the local area. So I was born and raised here. I was born and raised kind of in the shadow of what's now the Total refinery. It was FINA back then. And grown up three generations in what's the Texaco and Motiva refinery. So I had a brief stint there. I'll get to that in just a moment. 3 generations there. Counted this morning, there are 12 people with my last name who graduated from Lamar, various systems, including myself and all 3 of my brothers. So this is an institution for us and our family as well. But to go back, so I grew up in the local area. I'm a graduate of Briggs City High School. I graduated there in 92 and from Lamar in 97. If you told me 19 years ago that this would be where I was standing and addressing all of you, I would have laughed. I wouldn't have thought that was exactly where I would have landed. So I think it speaks a bit to how luck plays into it, but also how maybe a little perseverance and opportunity also crosses through there. So I started off, and I think the subject we had agreed to was kind of, so how did you get here, right? So it was to talk through where did I go and what did I learn. So I started working at a very young age, probably about 13 or 14, meaning for summers and full-time where I could. I carried groceries. I kept bees, one of my strange jobs. Did that over summers when I still played football. Helped keep you in shape. It certainly kept you exposed to the heat. I worked for a guy who probably was the first guy I ever really thought about as a leader. And Jack was retired. He had been retired for a long time. I never actually knew how old Jack was, but as a then 14-year-old, Jack was coaching. Jack was older than old. But Jack somehow managed to take every summer 4 or 5 14-year-olds and get them to be workers, which I look back now and say I have a couple of those at home, and I'm not sure I could do that. So he had certain powers in how things went. It always started at the gas station in the morning and letting you buy a soda pop or a Gatorade or whatever else. He treated us very well. And I think when I look back, one of the things that he did better than anyone else is he treated us like men instead of treating us like boys. And I think back to that and I think about all the leadership that I've ever been around does some version of that. Somehow they inspire in you the best of you, what you want to be, not necessarily where you are, what you want to do. So that was really one of the first experiences that I had. Did that for several summers. Was a vet tech. Did a lot of things in high school to do work. Always wanted to work. Was always interested in earning money or finding some way to do something. Mostly to spend on, early on, fishing lures, which then swapped at some point around my joining Lamar, beer and chasing girls and other things that became very interesting to me. So That took me through my Lamar experience. I also had a few other interesting experiences. I was a jailer for the Orange County Jail for about 3.5 years. So my mother had been in dispatch, and there was a job open in the jail. And once I turned 18, I could qualify for the jailer training course and exam, and I did, and that's where I worked. And I worked at nights when I took classes here during the day. And I learned a lot there as well, and not just the things you would normally think. Obviously, you learn a lot in a jail, dealing with people, including a lot of people maybe that you wouldn't normally deal with. But you also learn very quickly how to read people. And I think over those 3 years, I learned probably about as much about how to read a person, how to look at a situation, as I did anything else. And that for me also has been something that carried on for a long time in looking and judging. And it's not always looking at people who may do you harm. And certainly that was a part of being a jailer, was trying to figure out whether you were going to get this person to comply or you were going to have a fight. And it was about 50-50 depending on the individual. But I was also shocked several times at the number of people who, when you remove the drugs and the alcohol and all the external factors, were pretty normal, nice people. And that said to me a lot of things, that there's a lot of good in people. We have to find a way as leadership, as leaders, as managers, to channel that part, not the other. The other will always be there. I think there's always the opportunity for things to go wrong. So then I moved from that. There were a lot of things that went on, including a change in sheriff, which always is a bit like a change in cabinet within the political process. That had things change and who was doing what all changed. So I left there and I actually joined a security detail, working the gate at Motiva at the time. They had just become Motiva from Star Enterprise. And I worked nights there while I went to school here. That was challenging. This was basically for most of my senior year. Here, and I took organic chemistry and worked nights. I took a few other things and worked nights. And you had to really learn how to do manage your schedule. And I think for me, it's a bit like you hear, and not that I ever was in line, and certainly respect those who did, to be a Navy SEAL or anything else. But after a little while, you learn how to work with fatigue. You learn how to rearrange your schedule. You learn how to do all that. And those were very, very important lessons for me as well. I think it helps now that I often get off an airplane and then go to work for 12 hours. Having slept only a couple of hours, and a lot of times I go back to thinking about those exact days when I really learned how to push myself, how far I could push myself. Those things became very important in terms of life lessons for me and how I did that. So those experiences kind of molded together with the others. I also had an experience there that is one that I think cemented me taking an environmental science degree and going to safety, and that was I was working the gate one day. All of a sudden the radio traffic went nuts. There was a big cloud of smoke on the south side of the refinery, and they had an explosion. One employee killed, one badly burned that day. And that really affected me. Both of those people I knew, and one of them I had seen, the guy who had passed away, I had seen that morning. There were certain people who tended to stop by and say hello to the security guard in the morning. He was one. So to go from seeing someone that morning, that close, having your normal coffee conversation, saying hello, and then having them not be there was profound to me. And it was the first time in my life I'd ever really experienced that. I had seen, we'd lost a dog before, and I hadn't at that point lost a grandparent. But it was really profound to me, and I thought that day that maybe that was something I wanted to try to do. And as it came about, I started looking for jobs during my senior year. And the very first job that I found was environmental. I was working for Texaco Research and Development in Port Arthur when it still existed. And I got in touch through the university here. Actually, one of my professors got me in touch with a gentleman who was hiring for a summer intern. So I got to go there, and I got to test the air, and I got to test samples, and I got to do all kinds of things that I had already done. And I really enjoyed that job. But I didn't learn that much from him. He stayed in his office for the most part. And after working through the first set of deliverables that I had for my summer internship, I ran out after about a month and a half. And kind of got the normal, okay, well, you're done, so you can go and look and go try to find something else to do. Strangely enough, the person that I ended up bonding most with was one of the technicians. But he'd been there for right at 30 years. He was nearly in retirement. And after a little while, he said, well, if you really want to learn something, then let's do this. And he really spent the rest of that summer teaching me almost everything he had ever learned in 30 years. He taught me about the facility. He taught me about the pilot plants, including the ones that weren't even working. But he had worked on them 10 or 12 years ago. And he knew exactly what they had done, what they had tested, what went well, what went wrong, all of that. And it was really my first experience in dealing with someone who just had a lot to give. The guy had no reason to give it. No one was going to give him a bonus for giving it. Nothing was going to happen because of that. But he was at this stage in his career where I think he wanted to pass that along to someone. There was no one left to pass to. At that time, they were beginning to shrink the facility. Eventually, when Texaco was bought by Shell, or they merged, that facility was shut down. So I think he already had a sense that was going to happen. Upon losing that as my opportunity, because keep in mind, 3 generations had gone and worked for Texaco and then Star Enterprise, including my father and my uncle, who were still in the refinery then. Since I was the only generation to skip somehow. I have 2 brothers who are in the refinery working now. But I looked outside. What was I going to do next? And probably the greatest learning there was network. It was the first time I ever really had to go outside of my friends, family, and the university. Was really the circles that I had. Long before LinkedIn, so way back in the 90s, as my older children say. And I had to look for how I was going to find a job. And as it had it, I was talking to everyone and talking about what should I do. And lo and behold, a former baseball coach of one of my brothers was working for a company called Air Liquide. He said, "Who's Air Liquide?" And I said, "Who's Air Liquide?" This is not a company, being French, especially that necessarily puts out big billboards. The closest we come to advertising is if you look south, there's a big white column, and on the side is a blue AL. That's the one we're erecting now, so the plant's due to start next year. That's about as much advertising as this company does. Now, it's not a small company. It's a $20 billion company with roughly 70,000 employees. So operating in, I said this morning, I think it's gone from 85 to 87 countries. So a very large footprint globally. But I did know a company called Big 3 Industries. They had operated here in the area and were quite successful over many years, and knew several people from there. As it turns out, they needed a safety person, and I decided that's what I was going to do. So I went in basically as the intern. So I love to tell everyone that in the U.S., my first job title was intern, and my last one was CEO. So I liked that. That was a good way for me to put a cap on what had been a pretty good 20-year run. It starts to get a little boring after that. I moved around. Took several positions. The first real management position I ever had was I was promoted to manage the group that I had been a part of. And that's the biggest leadership challenge I've ever had in my entire career. So I took 7 guys of different ages, from my age to very senior people, and had to work with them in order to bring about change in a department. And I learned 2 things there very quickly, and not the smallest of which was it's very difficult to manage your friends. And I learned very quickly how to put that arm's length relationship in place, but still have some friendly relationship with employees. And it was really at that point where I decided that more so than safety or anything else, really what I was interested in and what I wanted to pursue was leadership. So I really started at that point on my own time, reading, looking, trying to find ways to educate myself on what to do. Because at that time I was still in my mid-20s. I was asked to supervise 7 or 8 other people. And for a little while I didn't have a clue. But I started then a pattern which I would say I still repeat today, which is each time I'm cast into that, and I find a way to repeatedly be cast into that. I'll talk in a minute about what it means to kind of have a brand as a person, particularly in a large corporation. But I started looking at how do I become the expert. In safety, I'd done it pretty naturally. I'd read all the policy and procedure. I'd read everything OSHA. I had become the encyclopedia, the Wikipedia, to be a bit more digital. Today, of that department, I knew what everybody else had known and written down for the last 20 years. And then I tried to find people who would teach me more. And I used all of that to my advantage in order to try to advance within the company. But I always saw myself, really, if I looked back, and I never really wanted to work in a corporate environment in a very sterile office with a bunch of cubicles. I'd grown up in the shadow of all these plants, and I always pictured myself being outside in those plants. So I started to look for an opportunity to do that. And I looked for an opportunity to do that within the same company. And that opportunity came, I moved to Baton Rouge, and I headed up maintenance for that area. Not so much because I had a ton of maintenance experience, but I learned very quickly that being able to manage people and effectively manage a group meant just as much as any technical knowledge that I had. So they said, fine, we'll teach you. The we'll teach you part didn't exactly play out the way that I thought, and I could have easily turned up and said, no one trained me, that's why I failed. But I quickly began to look again for who's going to teach me. There were two individuals. There's one guy who's a technical expert. They hired him from a compressor company in Germany about 25 years ago. And much like the guy I told you about at Texaco, he had one thing left to do, and that was to pass on some level of knowledge that he had. And he was willing to teach you any and everything you wanted to know about every one of our plants, how all of it worked, etc. And he became my new best friend. He's still someone that I stay in touch with today. And he really taught me the ins and outs of machinery and all the things that I didn't learn. I wasn't a mechanical engineer. I had enough of an engineering and technical background here at the university that I didn't think I ran across too many things that I was unable to process. But I certainly needed the crash course, and in very quick order. But I had to find a friend. I had to find someone to help me. And that pattern has gone on and on and on and on through the rest of my career. And I've taken on a lot of roles, a lot more in terms of leadership. But each of those very early experiences, I think, were formative for me. And I can go on. I have a lot more stories. I actually thought I would be speaking maybe to a less experienced audience. So I was focused very much on that aspect of, so what happened early? Because I think if I try to look forward 20 years, I'll be just as hard-pressed to predict that as anyone else. But coming into today, probably the biggest thing that I see with the digitization of life is those human interactions, that closeness to people, those other things are one of the biggest challenges that I see today in my own organization and in organizations everywhere else. I think when I look at, and I have children who are millennials, when I look at the generation that comes to work, they are infinitely more networked than we are. They are infinitely more able to reach to the outside world through digital tools and grab that information. But they're not necessarily able to stand up and present it. They're not able to stand in and do the things that to me were taught a very different way, maybe the school of hard knocks, in my formation as a leader. So I think as we go forward, we really have to think about how are we going to bridge that gap that comes with you have all the information available to you, but really learning how to be a leader takes a lot more than reading a book or even doing it right once. It's a lot of interaction between you and a lot of people, in my case through the course of 20 years, that end up forming someone who is able to lead within an organization. So I'm going to stop there. I can tell you a lot more about kind of the second half of my career, but a lot of that I think will fold into some of the things that I'm doing now and maybe some of the questions you have. So while we have time, I'd be very open to any questions you have, either about me, about our business, about what we do. So I'll leave it with you and I'll get a drink of water. Go ahead.
Very quickly, I'm an environmental engineer, and so I'm very curious about your transition from environmental scientist to a manager, to an MBA type individual that is doing the management. That is the part of my question. The second question, you just mentioned that it takes a lot more to become a great leader, which I totally agree with that. And I guess it's that different people have a different experience. And so from your experience, if you have to summarize it, do you have any suggestion that you are
Sure.
about?
So I would say now, looking at my current role and the last two roles, roughly 40% of my time when I do my goals and objectives for the year is to develop future leaders. It's a part of the company that says this is what we do. So as an executive of the company, what I'm supposed to be doing every day, aside from community outreach, this is also something that we do, is work on future leadership. And I would say a couple of things about that. I think there is an element of leadership to me that is truly a talent. There are skills, but the overall portion of what makes truly great leaders, that catapults people to great success in leadership, is one part certainly skills. It's the ability to manage people, the ability to manage information. It's the ability to put in the hours, to do the daily grind, to do all those things. And you can teach and you can groom people to do that. But really the ability to grab a hold of someone's heart, to be moving, is something that to me there is a bit of talent there. And you find people who have that talent. And when we look at leadership, we're looking for that thing. And it's often difficult to describe. Sometimes we find a way to describe it, sometimes we don't. The company tries to do that very early in careers and has for many years. They've had a program for almost 40 years, where before the age of 40, and preferably around the age of 30, we try to identify who we think our future leadership candidates are. I had the benefit of that program. So a few of the early successes I had in showing that I could manage people and showing I could manage complex things, managed to get our HR department and some of our executive team to say, we want to look at that individual, and what we say is stretch them. So you're often picked up and given stretch assignments, and I have been given several stretch assignments. It's nice to do that in an incubator environment, and I think the best thing about our company, talking about Air Liquide, I'll put a plug in for them, is that they do that early and often. The other thing that it does is you start to get a class of, much like you have a class within university, of people who are going about this same development. So I look now at the other people who are sitting at my level, if you will, within the organization, and there are 4 or 5 of them who we've come up basically together. It means we've interacted from the time we were young engineers all the way until the time now that we have that. And I think that goes to very strong networks. Talking about something that lasts more than just, I know you, I met you on LinkedIn, and now we're friends, to someone that I have interacted with, I have worked night and day with, I have fixed problems with. There's a degree of trust that comes there. To go back to your original question on what was the pivot, for me, what I've learned is that environmental science was always just a stepping stone. I thought about it as a career. I thought about it certainly the whole time that I was here, studying late at night and doing all the other things, that is what I was going to do. But very quickly, I also learned something about myself, which is when I hit about 80% of the learning curve, I start to run out of interest in that subject. I'm much more attuned to want to be very wide in my knowledge than very deep in my knowledge. So I was always very interested in using whatever I had to find the next thing to learn. And very quickly, I found the absolute best place to learn was wherever the smoke clouds on the horizon were. And every major organizational thing that has happened within my company, I have been a part of. Every reorganization, every downsizing, every acquisition, anything that was going to completely disrupt what we do, I ran to it. I tried to find any way to be put on that team. That meant you had to do extra work. I told you some of my earlier experiences kind of left me with thinking I could do that. And I was willing to do those things, but that gave me an opportunity to be exposed to people and things you would never see another way. One of the best things about an acquisition is you get kind of smacked in the face with what the difference between your company culture is and the company culture of the acquired or acquiring company. You learn very quickly there's a lot of other ways to do this. And often we were buying businesses that did the same thing we did. So it's a very unique opportunity to see that. But I kept using every one of those opportunities. Our company also tends to push you. When I say they go into these stretch assignments, whatever your degree is, once you're known to be a part, if you will, of the management pool or the management training pool, then they start looking at how to make you a more general manager. So they're looking at how do they get you experience in finance? How do you get experience in HR matters and management? How do you do those broadening type of things, in addition to whatever your technical expertise is or was? Some people tend to stay in a particular technical area, some don't. And for me, I've always wanted to go to whatever the next technical area was. So I didn't join actually our engineering company until about 5 years ago. Before that, I was in the operating company and had been for about 10 years. So I'd done quite a bit in maintenance and reliability. But I had done enough project work and I had worked enough on our processes that I didn't have a lot of trouble transitioning over to the engineering company. Had to learn a lot about EPC, so engineering, procurement, construction type of work, how projects are structured, etc. But after a couple of years, you tend to learn. And I think what I'm building toward now is what I was saying when I talked about kind of a personal brand, and I still have that, would still say that. Every time we have somewhere that needs fixing, I'm one of the names that I found a way to be a part of. So I like, and still do, to be there. And each time we have something going on, if I'm not a part of it now, there's some part of my heart that feels like I ought to run to whatever that is, that thing that's burning is. So maybe a bit of a firefighter mentality.
That's a great story.
Thank you.
What will you be doing, Chad, in this new role that you're
Okay.
now taking
Well,
in?
one of my recent roles, in 2014, I spent 6 months in Paris, France, and 6 months in Frankfurt, Germany. I got to do that under the cloak. They pulled me out of my existing business unit, told no one where I was going, and I disappeared for a year. So it's a bit like working for the CIA. I think. So there's a few people who tried to figure out whether I got deleted or not. I didn't get deleted. But I was working for the then CEO directly for him on a project that really reshaped our entire engineering business globally. And one of the things we did was create several new roles, including areas we wanted to function or have kind of functional responsibility globally. We had always operated in geographies, so China for China, the U.S. for the U.S., India for India, for example. We have engineering centers in each of those areas. But when we look now at our portfolio, our projects, and how things actually evolve, there are so few projects now that actually evolve within the U.S., only using U.S. companies and only for U.S. consumption, that we really needed a much broader view. So we needed people who understood kind of, if you will, the international and global businesses. So I worked on a restructuring project that restructured our engineering business with Bain Consulting in Paris for 6 months, and then went to Frankfurt to implement that program with our management team. So I came back, and when I came back, they actually appointed me to be the vice president for the U.S., which is the role that I had before now, to implement this program in the U.S. In the same time, there's been another change at the top, which seems to be too often sometimes for us. And the gentleman who had sales and technology globally, who we had hired from the outside, is now the CEO. But he asked me to come and take over. There's still a few areas that we really need to do improvement, and one of those is really around product lines. So we've taken these various products that we have globally, different types of plants to make different products, and it really covers a wide array. We have almost 53 different unique technologies that we sell, ranging from things that we sell as a license, so in other words, we sell a package to someone who builds it themselves, to process plants that we build for our customers. This role is really to focus all of that effort globally, both the sales for the customer interaction, the direct customer interaction, plus the product lines who have all of the technology resources in terms of people. The engineering business is a very people-intensive business. And have all those in pools to really make sure all that's working well together. I could go a lot more into detail, but it's really to bring together the customers, the internal logistics, if you will, of moving a project through, and working with our various regions is my primary responsibility. I say it that way, it just doesn't sound all that sexy, so. I need to work on my elevator pitch.
So you're gonna be moving to Frankfurt, but like before that, where was your like, I guess like your permanent location?
My permanent location, of the 19 years that I've been with the company, I spent 17 of them in Houston.
So like, is that where they're like headquarters?
It's where our North American headquarters are. So the headquarters for the company is in Paris, France, but it's a fairly small corporate entity in Paris. It's right downtown. It's a mile or so from the Eiffel Tower. So fairly expensive address in Paris, but that's where corporate finance, et cetera, is. Then we have large clusters throughout the globe. The Americas is all headquartered in Houston. All of Europe is in Frankfurt, Germany. And then we have various satellite offices. We have Shanghai and other places that we have groups, if you will, of corporate people. So meaning not the plants and operators and the people who are making the product, but the people who are doing the financials.
Also, so like now you work like in corporate, but earlier you were saying something about like not wanting to work in corporate.
Correct. So no, I went and I actually worked in the plants for almost 10 years. So every day I put on a pair of steel toe boots and Nomex, and I was quite happy in that world. There's a lot of days that I wake up and go, I wonder if I gave up something I shouldn't have given up. Maintenance was hard. You got a lot of criticism and everybody's mad at you when it didn't work. There's something very rewarding about it. Was broken when I showed up in the morning, and it's working when I left. So you kind of get that. I'm done with it. Working in the field that I work in now, it seems it's just endless, right? I'm chasing the time, the sunrise around the globe, to try to get a lot of people to work together who aren't necessarily all on the same page. It seems communications and persuasion are my primary responsibilities, along with writing long letters and emails and other things to try to get everybody to do what they should be doing. So I do think, in some way, I still miss.
Are you glad that you get into the corporate world, though? Like, are you glad?
Yeah, I think in terms of that, at the end of 10 years of being in operations, I wanted to go home and stay there at night. There was a lot of time I spent throughout that, and it was an opportunity for me at the time to spend more time with my family and do that. Now, I think I'm on the opposite end of that. I spend more time on an airplane than I do anywhere else. But I think as time changes, for me at least, also my interests changed drastically. The things that were very important to me in one stage of my career are much less important and less in later stages. And I find myself now going back to almost full circle. You was talking about the people who want to teach and teach others. I think when it comes to elements like leadership, I probably spend as much time as I can working with the people who we have flagged as future leaders to try to say, what can they do within our context to develop those skills? And it's a difficult journey because often it's one with a whole lot more self in it. Leadership is not necessarily pushing to others that you're a leader. Leadership is a whole lot of reflecting on yourself of what do I need to do to get them on board. And each team is different, each person is different, each situation is different. And often the best laid plan that I have coming into a situation gets changed 5 or 6 times as soon as we have direct contact with whatever the problem is. So most recently, oil going from 140 to 40 was a slight issue for us in terms of project backlogs and what we sell, because we've been gearing up for the past 10 years on products that took advantage of this high oil price, low gas price market. Now that didn't exist, so now what? And those are some of the harder things that come about. And I think as we look forward, and if I have messages to deliver to, I think, groups now, it is that volatility is not going away. The norm that I got to live through over the last 20 years of relative stability is no longer going to be there. And we say that